Shalom, everyone. Welcome to this week's video Shiur on Parshat Shavua. This week we are going to be reading Parshat Bo, and Parshat Bo offers what I think is a very important insight, an educational insight, a parenting insight to one of the most difficult situations that we face as parents, or really we face any time we encounter some cynicism. From time to time, parents speak to me about children, or teachers speak to me about students who are cynical, who are not interested in observance, who are not interested in mitzvot, are not interested in tefillah, in davening, and it's a very frustrating situation. And it certainly is something which calls for a nuanced approach, and it certainly is something that calls for an approach that is unique to each individual family dynamic and classroom dynamic, and is most importantly taking into account the unique personalities of the children and students involved. I'd like to offer, however, a general framework in which we could look at this, which I think could be of great help. And it stems from this week's Parsha. And I think it gives us great hope and can lower the tension level, and most importantly, lower the frustration level, and hopefully be successful to some degree. As Moshe is preparing Bnei Yisrael to leave Mitzrayim, and he's talking to them about the Karban Pesach, the sacrificial Paschal offering that had to be brought before they were leaving, he mentions to them what's going to happen later on. It's interesting that Moshe goes from telling them about what they have to do at that moment as they're leaving Egypt to what's going to happen later in history when they get to Eretz Yisrael. And the Torah says, and if you want to stop the video for a moment and grab a Chumash, we are in Exodus, that's Shemot, chapter 12, Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Chaf Hey, verse 25. V'haya ki tavo el haaretz asher yitein Hashem lachem kasher diber, and it shall come to pass when you come into the land which God will give you as He has promised. U'shemartem et avodah hazot, you shall keep this service. You shall keep the Pesach service. Continue to observe Pesach with the sacrifice. V'haya ki yomru aleichem b'neichem ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. And then when your children shall say to you, what mean you by this service? What are you doing? What good is this for? First of all, just an interesting side point that Moshe is telling Bnei Yisrael that right now, it seems to me that what he's saying is right now, it's clear to everyone why you're doing this. You're doing this because you have been the recipients of amazing miracles. You've been the beneficiaries of amazing largesse from God to finally take you out of Egypt. And the service that you're doing to Him is in gratitude to that. It's obvious to everyone. But generations down the road, when you're doing something, it's not going to be so obvious. And even you, perhaps Moshe is saying, as parents, who have a recollection of this, or who have maybe one generation removed from this, your children, grandchildren, they don't have the same recollection, and therefore they do not have the same connection. So the first lesson that we're learning from this is that we may have had, as adults, we may have had certain experiences in our lives that have made us religiously committed, that have made us religiously sensitive and really focused on our religious life. Our children have not had the same experiences that we have. That's for sure. They have not had the same circumstances as we have. And since they haven't had the same circumstances as we have, we cannot necessarily assume that they're going to have the same feelings as we have. Now, of course, as parents, it's our obligation to try to give our children similar experiences to what impressed us from a religious perspective, but everyone's different. And so Moshe is warning Bnei Yisrael of that. And then what's interesting is the answer that the Torah gives, that what Moshe is telling the Jewish people they are supposed to say to their children who ask them what this is all about. Now, you may be aware that this question, Ma havodah hazot lachem, has been adopted, if you will, by the Haggadah as the question of the Rasha, the question of the evil child. It's interesting that the Haggadah understands this as a rebellious question. I'm not convinced that this is always a rebellious question. When someone asks, what are we doing this for? It could be an honest attempt to understand faith. I'm not convinced that this always has to be a question of rebellion, but the Haggadah accepts this question as the question of the rebellious son. Now let's listen, let's look very carefully to the answer that the Torah gives this question, which the Haggadah understands to be the question of the rebellious son. Va'amartem zevach pesach hu laHashem. You shall say, it is a meal of a haltingly Passover salvation, asher pasach al batei b'nei Yisrael, who haltedly passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, b'nagfoat hamitzrim, when he smote the Egyptians, v'et bateinu itzil, and our houses he saved, v'yikoda am v'yishtachavu. Then the people bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. So it seems like the answer is, well, we're doing this to remember what happened in Mitzrayim and to give thanks that God saved our ancestors when he came ahead and he killed the firstborn in every house. He didn't do that to the houses of the Jews, and the Jews were saved. It seems at first glance that's what's going on. But there's something else going on here, and it's pointed out by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Because if you read carefully, it says, Ve'amartem, and you shall say. To who? Now, in the context, you could say, well, of course, you're saying to the person who answered the question. But Rav Hirsch says, Va'amartem, not Va'amartem lahem. The Torah says you shall say, and not you shall say to them. As it says other times in the Torah, Va'amarta elav, V'higadeta levincha, you shall say to him, or you shall say to your children. Here the Torah does not indicate to whom the answer is being given. And so Rav Hirsch says the following. The Torah does not expect any result from direct teaching or preaching to a generation which is sunk in materialism and estranged from God. But it does, meaning it does expect results from the example of mitzvot earnestly carried out in understanding and conscious enthusiasm. What's Rav Hirsch saying here? In a word, Rav Hirsch is calling for consistency. Rav Hirsch is saying, you know what? Sometimes answering or saying something, you have to do this mitzvah, or directing your remarks to an individual who, in the language of the Haggadah, may be rebelling, is not always going to work. But what does work? Being consistent, making sure that our Jewish life making sure that our Jewish life looks in the eyes of our children as something sincere and real to us. Va'amartem, when you do the mitzvah, Hirsch says, say this, I am doing this mitzvah because God took my ancestors out of Mitzrayim, etc., etc. And he's saying whenever we do any mitzvah, make sure that we are doing it with consciousness and an understanding, without hypocrisy, making sure that what our children hear us saying matches up what they see us doing. That, Hirsch says, is the educational response to this child who says, Ma avodah zot lachem. What good is this for you? Not direct lecturing, not saying you have to, you must, and this is the reason why. Simply doing the mitzvot ourselves. When we model the way of life, and we show, just through our modeling and without the lecturing, that these mitzvot are so important to us, and they bring so much beauty to our lives, and they enrich our lives, and they make us kinder and better people, that, Rav Hirsch says, is perhaps a way to get to some of the children who may not be so receptive to a direct lecture or a talking to, or even an explanation, as nice and as gentle, as kind as it may be. So again, as I started saying, as I said at the outset, every child is different, every parent is different, teacher, school setting, it's all different, and there's no one pat answer. But I think Rav Hirsch is onto something in terms of a general approach. And that is one of the great challenges that towards our children and students' development is sometimes what they see and think is hypocrisy. They see us saying, they hear us saying certain things, but they see us doing other things. They see us telling our children, you have to go to shul, you have to learn, you have to do, you have to follow certain rules, and they don't necessarily see us following certain rules. And perhaps Rav Hirsch is hinting at that's all wrong. Those types of lectures, especially, even if we are doing what we say that our children should do, often don't work, and certainly don't work when our children sniff a little hypocrisy. What does work is when our children see us living the life that we expect of them to live. Ve'amartem. You say in your own practice, without saying to anyone else, we do what we have to do, and with love and with consciousness and with beauty, and again, making sure that our children see that our religious lifestyles make us into better human beings, not only better Jews. I think that's another important characteristic. Then we may be onto something in terms of trying to break through that shield, that force field that our kids sometimes put up between our religious hopes and themselves. Rav Kook, some of Rav Kook's writings were recently published, and he says that the real challenge of our generation, of his generation, that he saw with young people who were not engaged in the religious lifestyle, was that they didn't see how the religious lifestyle led to ethical character and to heightened ethical awareness. So just to review two things here. One way to get to anyone who may not be open to a shiur, a lecture, is to model a passionate, conscious Jewish lifestyle that we do ourselves, and that is easily recognizable as something very beloved to us and very meaningful to us, and that adds richness and a certain spirit to our lives. And B, that also our religious experiences and our observance of mitzvot should lead us to an ethical life and to a kind life, and that when children or anyone on the street sees a Jew who observed mitzvot is also a kind and generous and concerned person, that certainly is an attractive commercial to anyone to become more engaged and more involved in the life of Torah and mitzvot. And so that is today's mini shiur, an educational lesson, a lesson perhaps in how to organize our religious life and think about it vis-a-vis our children and others. I hope you've enjoyed. Look forward to your comments. Shalom.